Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Morning Shots. And if you've noticed in my videos of recent, we first talked about NEDLAC and this idea that NEDLAC was trying to reintroduce some firearms legislation to, well, effectively take away your firearm. Now, NEDLAC has since denied that, and the Civilian Secretariat for Police said, well, actually, it wasn't NEDLAC, it was them who was pushing forward some firearm legislation, and that when they were at an appropriate stage, they would submit this to cabinet for, well, consideration. Now, they haven't really said what that will include. They haven't said why they're doing it. And to be honest, it's left a lot of people asking the question, is firearms amendments coming to the Republic yet again? This will be about the fourth or fifth reincarnation of these. And so to go through this, I've actually invited an expert onto the channel with me. And Jonathan Wright is the head of the Firearms Policy Commission? Campaign. So the FPC, a 3-year-old organization. So thank you for coming on the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you for having me.
So tell us, what is the FPC before we even start?
So the FPC is a firearm policy advocacy group. We model ourselves as pro-choice on the matter. We try to avoid the anti-pro labels. Evidence-based, ostensibly we are pro-firearm. We're all firearm owners. We believe that the arguments against firearm ownership are poor or suboptimal, and that's being polite about it. Broadly speaking, we are public safety oriented. That is what our PBO, public benefit organization status, is for. But we have a specific focus on the role of firearms in society and how that can be a positive social institution.
Right. And so what's the current objectives of the organization? Like, what if you get what you want to achieve, what does that look like?
Well, step one is for me to finish my doctorate on the topic of the history of firearm regulation in South Africa from the colonial era to present day. It's nearly done. And that will really inform why the law is like it is and what we can expect to achieve going forward. The basic philosophy being, if you understand the past, you have a much better prospect of navigating the future. What would we actually want to achieve, or how would we translate that into something tangible for people, for farm owners, for the general public? It would be good evidence-based policy, understanding what the law can achieve, what it can't achieve, and having a legal framework that meets those objectives, that isn't irrational, arbitrary, and ridiculous, a lot of which the Firearms Control Act is, and even the law that came before it had those similar problems. But yeah, education is a big part, and once we can translate this into an actual policy framework, our ultimate goal would be repeal the Firearms Control Act and replace it with something that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, but I mean, what we've seen with the previous amendments is that they were going to amend it, but they were going to amend it in a way that was not very good, because the suggestion in the previous amendment was that they were going to remove self-defense, and it looked like they were trying to move towards like a Botswana and Namibia model where they get like 5 firearms and 200 rounds, and you couldn't really move the firearms easily. You'd have to justify all of them even more strictly than you do now. And as you know, they all came under a lot of scrutiny, mainly because of the crime rates in South Africa. So what do you make of the current climate within firearms policy? Are they still wanting to push that forward?
Yes, but the important thing I think to maybe keep in mind is something that very few people appreciate, even if they understand it vaguely, is where the Firearms Control Act came from and why. It was ultimately a product of the 1990s, which, especially the early 1990s, was a very turbulent time, to put it lightly, for South Africa. The issue of unlawful firearm possession has been a problem for the government for over a century, and it's always scared them, and they've been trying to get a lid on this since, well, before the 1930s, really. And obviously they've always failed because they don't understand the problem. They've never properly diagnosed it. They associate unlawful possession with causing the violence as a unlawful possession by itself just makes people do bad things, which of course it doesn't. There is underlying intent, and there are other social problems. But because firearms are loud and flashy and tangible, there's this idea that, look, if we can control these things, and because they're associated with crime, if we can control these things, then we'll make the crime problem less or just go away entirely. Obviously, that's not true. The National Party in the 1990s, they put a lot of effort into this, and a lot of it is very emblematic, similar to what's happening today and happens in the Firearms Control Act. They were making ridiculous amendments to the Arms Ammunition Act to just show, look, we're doing something, to give a semblance of we can control this, which they couldn't. They didn't even know what they were doing. The ANC came along, they inherited all of this, they accepted it lock, stock, and barrel. In '95, they were actually, the ANC was quite anti-firearm ownership. '95, they were suddenly much more moderate on it. They even called the Arms Ammunition Act enlightened legislation. And then, well, we got the Firearms Control Act 5 years later. And the reason that happened was because Gun Free South Africa got its claws into them, convinced them on what they should be doing to try and solve this horrific violence problem. '95 was actually the year where the homicide rate was the highest that we ever had. And so the ANC just tried to get a lid on this thing, and their approach was the Firearms Control Act. They were listening to Gun Free South Africa and their allies. And yeah, so that's where the Firearms Control Act came from. Once we actually got it, then, and it became law, the wheels started to come off the bus with that. It wasn't working as promised. The homicide rate started going up again from 2010. It hasn't, I think there's only been 1 year where it went down slightly. So it has objectively failed in that respect. From 2010 as well, the ANC became very disillusioned with the Firearms Control Act and the underlying rationale. They almost seem to switch off completely. And since then, it's really been the bureaucracies that are running the show, and that's what I believe has happened. The government has completely switched off and disconnected from everything. They let the bureaucracies do anything they want, brings them the document and says, you should do this. And they say, cool, we'll go with that. And they get pushed in front of a microphone with a script, they read it, and well, off they go. So, yeah, I don't believe that there's any political will or driving behind this. I think it's just ideologues in these bureaucracies, like the CSP, the police even. They have a history of tinkering and pushing for firearm controls since the 1930s. And
yeah, but why? Why? What's the driver? Look, I understand that there's this idea that there's lots of illegal firearms in the country, and to be honest, that hasn't actually got any better. I read the other day that a number of illegal firearms have been smuggled into the country from Namibia, and that those firearms were now being found in the Cape Flats. We've seen that there's been a number of caches that have been stolen in various army barracks around the countries because of lack of security. I think in one army barracks, they even managed to steal rounds from an attack helicopter. Don't know where you're going to fire that, but apparently they were able to steal rounds from an attack helicopter. Let's not forget that there was the millions of rounds that were stolen in the July riots, which, as you know, were never found. There's all the firearms in the Cape Flats that the police had taken on the amnesty and were sold back to the Cape Flats. There's a book written about it called We Need More Guns. Like, the reality is, to suggest that a lot of the firearms that are the problem in the States are the legal ones betrays anything of common sense. In fact, I once listened to a speech by Minister Gayton McKenzie who said that often, a lot of the times, white people specifically, he said, think that they're safer is because they have their legal firearms. And I'm going to quote him when he said, trust me, the illegal firearms and the way that they obtain them outnumbers your guns 10-1. So even he knew it as a minister, and he was like, you guys think you're safe with your legal firearms. And he's like, these guys have got AK-47s by the bucket load. So we aren't the problem, so per se. The illegal firearms are the problem. So the question becomes, why do they want to disarm legal firearms?
so I don't think I disagree with Minister McKenzie at all. something else that I sincerely believe is that, well, illegal firearms, what is this? It's a meaningless term. It doesn't really mean anything. Uh,
Well, actually, Gun Free South Africa clarified that at one point, and they said illegal firearms means that at one point in time the firearm was legal, and they said all firearms start off legal and become illegal. So it's a very interesting approach because it implies that from their perspective, every firearm starts off as legal, but through some means becomes illegal. But you and I both know that that's not
yeah,
true.
I understand what they're trying to say, but it's really just word games at the end of the day, because what is a firearm?
100%.
It's just an inanimate object. It's neither legal or illegal. It is just an object, and it can be lawfully or unlawfully possessed. But even that has limits. When we look at the United States, where for most part the country doesn't have a centralized registry and a license for each and every individual firearm, there are more firearms than there are people in that country. They're very easy to access. It doesn't have the same levels of violence that you do in South Africa, which fundamentally just disproves on its face that firearms cause this kind of violence. But our bureaucracies, and even a lot of politicians, even if they don't push it so hard anymore, they they still have a bit of the Kool-Aid in their system in this regard. And as I said, the bureaucracies are just left alone to do whatever they want. They're captured by ideologues. They're hopelessly incompetent. I mean, how can you say we're going to remove self-defense as a reason to own a firearm and seriously and think this is going to be serious legislation and put it before Parliament and expect to be taken seriously? It's ridiculous. You've no doubt seen the PASIRA regulation the proposed amendments to the PASIRA regulations, which include classifying handcuffs as a weapon, which needs to be
Yes.
like this is the
And I think mace was deemed to
yep.
be a weapon,
And
even though
I read
mace
I
is
read the
the most effective way
regulations.
to do forms of
Yeah,
SIR
yeah.
enforcement,
And I
security
read the
enforcement.
regulations yesterday, and at the end of that list is and any other weapon that may cause harm to civilians. What does that even?
Which includes a spoon, by the way.
Yeah, that's literally anything. Hands, feet, tonfas. Like basically, they just want security to stand there. You can't even shout at the person because that might cause psychological harm to civilians. So
Well, we've seen this in countries like the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, according to the Prohibited Weapons Act over there, that a spoon could be classed as an offensive weapon because under the Dangerous Weapons Act, if the intention of the spoon is to cause harm to another, that's the way it's defined. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a toothpick. If the intention of possession is to harm another, it's a dangerous object and therefore it's illegal. So
I mean,
same
at the
idea,
end of
right?
the day, what is a weapon? It's literally anything that can be used offensively. So that means the intent. I've got a paperweight on my desk. That's a weapon. There's a nail file somewhere around here. That can be used as a weapon. But most people wouldn't conceive of it as such. But I mean, John Wick has shown us that a pencil is very much a weapon, and everybody has one of those around. So
Well, that was the whole point. That was the whole point of that section, that part of the film, though, isn't it? So,
yeah, but my point is that the bureaucracies, they're running the show here. They have no political leadership. They're hopelessly incompetent, and they're coming up with astoundingly ridiculous propositions. And somehow this is supposed to get through Parliament. I mean, the CSP, the way I read it was they practically insulted Ian Cameron, who is was the chairman of the of the Police Portfolio Committee. This is the person you have to get on your side if you want to get any of your proposals to go anywhere. And when he asked the CSP, they're just like, no, just wait, we'll get to you. It's like, that's not, there's no transparency in these amendments. They weren't in 2015, they weren't in 2018, which weren't really amendments. That was just a leaked proposal, which came back in 2021 as an official amendment. And why would there be any transparency and attempt to involve people now? Uh, there's no good faith. And the reason I think is because they know that if they did that, they wouldn't get the proposal in the form that they want to Parliament. They wouldn't get the results that they want. But I don't really know what they're still hoping to achieve, because even if the politicians are not driving this, they are still sensitive to public pressure. We saw it in 2015, 2018, 2021, and it'll probably happen again now. When people get really upset and there's a huge uproar, they quickly and quietly shelve it and they go away for a few years and then they come back and they say, here we are, we tried again. And there's nothing really different. Big uproar, get shelved, because that's what politicians respond to. It's one of the few things they respond to.
What's the actual approach to firearms control from the various political parties? Let's use the top four: EFF, ANC, DA, and MK Body.
So I did try look into this ahead of the last year's elections to try and figure out, okay, where does everybody stand on this? And nobody really has a strong position. At most, I think I could say that the DA is nominally pro-firearm, but if you ask them what does that mean, they're very vague. They'll say, yeah, we support private civilian firearm ownership subject to regulation, which doesn't really mean anything. What regulation?
That's the DA.
Yeah, Freedom Front Plus is the same. It's like a one-liner in party manifestos, and it's something that we as the FPC would like to try and change going forward, to tell these political parties, look, there's a whole constituency out here. They just want to see a bit more policy direction from you, something that's not vague and vapid and ethereal. I mean, the ANC I would say that they are nominally opposed to firearm ownership, but a lot of their members,
ANC.
Yeah, the ANC, but a lot of their members are very much pro-firearm. I think Gideon Yobert, you might have to ask him to retell you the story. But
just because most of them get gunned down, so without their firearm, they feel a little bit vulnerable.
Well, considering how those political assassinations are carried out, I'm not so sure how seriously they take personal responsibility for themselves in that regard. It's quite sad. I mean, I understand the dynamics of why it happens, fighting for these council seats and things like that. But the rank and file party members, the ones on the ground that have other jobs and things to do, or if they have a job at all, my impression of them is that they are nominally pro-firearm, and there's a bit of a disconnect between the party and its members, if that's the case, which wouldn't be the first time that this has happened. Frans Cronje talks about this a lot, not in firearms, but in other areas of policy. So, to answer your question, there isn't really there's nothing really substantial from any of the political parties out there. None of them have really kind of said, we are pro-firearm, and this is what we want to see in law. If they're pro at all, there's no details, and we would like to really change that going forward.
What's the chances of the legislation coming out and being passed?
I think very low. And again, I'll refer to historical precedent in this. The 2015 amendments, huge outcry, to which the ANC, to its credit, responded. They held a firearms forum over 3 days. They listened to various experts, including Gun Free South Africa, but also Martin Hood and other people from the pro-firearm side. A whole report was produced. Maggie Sochu, I think it was her, she was chairing it, even came out at the end and said, we have learned a lot in this process. This will help shape the amendments going forward. She even said that maybe we need to reduce the age limit from 21 to 18. That might be a good idea. And then we heard nothing, and then we got the 2018 leaked amendments. And then 2021 happened, and that generated, I think, 180,000 comments, 2,000 comments a day. What other legislation gets that level of attention? And now we are 4 years later, and it looks like we are about to repeat the whole spiel all over again. But based on past precedent, I think that there will be an uproar, the government will quietly put it away. And we have Ian Cameron in Parliament as well, and he is not going to allow himself to be bullied and manipulated by the bureaucracies that are there. I mean, they've already started to alienate him, so...
Yeah, but that's the problem. So you got Ian Cameron in Parliament, and he's the head of the police portfolio, but he's only the head of the police portfolio for a time, for a period. Remember, he can be removed. And we know that that's what the ANC does. When the ANC feels that doesn't get their way, they tend to want to alienate and sidetrack people.
Oh, we'll have to see how that plays out here. I mean, Ian is very popular within South Africa. So there is a political risk if the ANC were to remove him. I again, I'm not saying that the ANC is inherently rational about things, so they might just well do that. But it really depends how strongly they feel about this. And they say it's like they read from a prepared script every time. There's no evidence that they really have a deep commitment or conviction on this topic. And since 2010, they've just become more and more just like, I mean, even Martin Hood, I think it may be 2021 or 2018, when he first said it's clear to him that the ANC has just completely abdicated. They're terrified of the topic. They want nothing to do with it. And at the time, I thought, okay, I can somewhat agree with that. But in the course of my own research for my doctorate, I have also come to that conclusion independently of what Martin has said. And they really just don't. They really want to keep their own distance from it. Like they'll put their name on it. Ultimately, they are responsible for it because it's their bureaucracies. But it's not like they're going to. So far, they haven't exactly. They're not willing to throw themselves in front of the cannon or the gun to stop whatever bullet is coming their way to do this. They just respond to the pressure, withdraw the bill, and then they bring it back. It's a cycle. It goes over and over and over again.
So I noticed that Cosatu actually issued some commentary on this yesterday around their view on firearms control, and their view was that, again, all of the incidents in South Africa, you're more likely to be killed from your own firearm. Firearms that are illegal all came from, the private sector, your firearm, my firearm, whatever that might be. They troped out the usual BS that's been debunked 4,862 times. But it's the standard playbook. You're more likely to be killed from your own firearm. You shouldn't have one because your firearm, when they kill you, will get stolen and then used for further crimes. So you're perpetrating the issue. What's your view of that?
I went through that press release, and as you said, trope. That's exactly what it is. It is just laden with tropes. In fact, it almost felt like a temper tantrum of sorts. The way that the use of italics and this phraseology that they use, it's like, who wrote this? And Cosatu has been a bit more animated on the topic of firearms the past 10 years, which is very different to what the ANC has been the past 10 years. And that is quite interesting. I haven't given it much thought. It was only with the release of that press release that I thought that, okay, there's something interesting maybe happening here. But also Cosatu, like the ANC, with the way the political tides are going in South Africa, they are losing relevance. And this could just be another, like a PR thing. Look, we're still here, sort of thing. And I mean, again, what does Cosatu and Labour and NEDLAC and whatever have to do with firearms? Nothing, really.
Well, I mean, the problem is that Cosatu are part of the Tripartite Alliance, and technically they do have some form of, should we say, political power?
Yeah.
Might not be a lot, but they do have political power.
No, I agree.
So they do shape policy within the ANC.
They do, but again, the question becomes the ANC are the faces of that policy at the end of the day. They're the ones in the government positions, and are they willing to take the heat? And based on previous amendment efforts, I don't think so, and I hope that it stays that way. And I have also felt a palpable change in the level of energy within the firearm community of South Africa in the past couple of years. They're becoming a lot more uppity, if I can say that. They're a bit more agitated. It's like we're getting tired of this nonsense, and that's a good thing because the more pressure that there is, the less likely these sorts of things will actually come to pass.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, if you look at Cosatu as an organization, as you know, I think like 14% of their membership is now under the ages of 30. They've got like 14% of their members are youth members. Remember that South Africa has a youth unemployment rate of like just under 60%. And what's interesting about Cosatu at the moment is, as I'm sure you know, that the membership numbers are dropping.
Oh.
Mainly because jobs are
No,
dropping.
trade unions represent the employed. They do not represent the unemployed, and we have an unemployment crisis. By
Mhm.
definition, the relevance of trade unions is like falling off a cliff. Like the last ditch relevance that any of these unions tend to have is, oh, look, the Goodyear tire factory in Eitenach is closing down. We have negotiated severance packages. Okay, great. That's the last service you'll ever do for them because they're now factually unemployed.
That's it. That's
You're
done.
toast.
But you see, that one there was interesting because again, it shows you the way that the unions generally tend to think. Because shortly after it closed, they talked about employee ownership of the business, which comes straight into this whole communist idea of take over the factories and have the communist idea of ownership. The collective will own it, but these things never work, and we've seen this now with ArcelorMittal as well, because they're like, well, we'll just nationalize that. Like it's all this idea of we'll bankrupt these industries and then nationalize, but I don't know if they've ever. I know this is an old, Soviet playbook that they're pulling out here, but there's two problems with this Soviet playbook that they're playing out with. The first one is it didn't work in Russia. The second is they don't have the money. So how they think they're going to do it, don't know. But there's the unwritten thing they don't talk about as well. There were no unions in Soviet Russia. If you didn't do your job, you got shot. So unions generally only work in capitalist countries where you can apply like some form of unionship to the labor market, and there's no unions in China either. So this seems like the fastest way to make yourself obsolete.
I think in the case of Soviet Russia and even Nazi Germany, I think Nazi Germany did have a union body. The Soviets might have as well, but it would have just been one under the Politburo. So like they're not going to listen to anything you say. They're effectively not there. It's
Yeah.
kind of there in name only. But as Franz Grenier likes to say, reality is that thing that is still there even when we stop believing in everything else. And maybe I've just butchered the quote, I don't know, but I think the message carries. And reality is very much here. It is catching up. And if these multi-hundred-year-old companies can't make a profit in some of these sectors in South Africa, good luck for anyone else that's going to try when they pull out. And how do you go bankrupt? Slowly at first, then all of a sudden, all at once. And that's what we are seeing now in the political scene as well. This ANC behemoth is, from as far as the polls are concerned, is just hemorrhaging support. And again, Franz Connier said ages ago that the way things are going, this was before the 24 elections, the ANC is going to end up as one of these 1 or 2% parties holding an elective conference under a tree in the Northwest Province before they know it. And so,
Well, it's getting there pretty fast at the moment, but I got to ask who's pushing this firearms legislation, who's pushing the amendments, because as we've just discussed, it's not a vote winner for the unions, it's not a vote winner for the ANC. The public, as you've said, is getting hot for with it. The firearms industry is getting hot for with it and becoming more militant. So who's pushing it? You could say, well, the civilian secretariat, because they're ideologically captured. They've been ideologically captured since the 30s. Even they can't be that stupid. So who's pushing it?
it's it really is a difficult question to answer in high specifics, in any degree of specificity. But the short answer would really seem to just be the CSP. They they are the ones that seem to be pushing it. I mean, when you look at the visitor logs for the 2021 amendments, it's just police officials and the CSP. There's nobody else there. There were suspicions that Gun Free South Africa's fingerprints were all over those amendments, but they weren't. They weren't in those meetings, and that I guess is something that's a positive thing to see that so many people are shut out that even Gun Free South Africa gets shut out of these processes. Not that it stopped them from getting a hold of the Wit School of Governance report that said the Firearms Control Act is not working before anybody else did, but that's another story entirely. Um, but it really seems to all just be coming out of the CSP and the police. They are the ones drafting these policies, and I guess we can throw Pasira in there. They're really trying to get into the firearm debate for some bizarre reason. Like when you read those regulations from March that they proposed, it's clear that they are really trying to repeat the hyper control rationale of the Firearms Control Act on steroids, but for the purposes of private security. And that itself is just strange, irrational, and insane.
It's very interesting. I mean, okay, so let's say it's the CSP. So what's the CSP's mandate? I mean, obviously, I know they work for the Minister of Police, right? But what's their mandate?
Their job is to provide input and research, and it's their job to provide the information necessary to make legislation and amendments. And so it's well within their mandate to do this sort of thing. But where the motivation for the form that these amendments is taking, where that motivation is coming from, it's not immediately clear, except to say, well, clearly it's the subjective state of mind of the officials in the CSP. And even though they've been ridiculed and run out of parliament 3 times already, they keep coming back with the same delusional proposals. And it is something, it is so stupid, silly, it is so irrational that it's difficult to believe that it's even happening and that it keeps happening over and over again. And well, I would say long may it continue, because as long as they are insane and their proposals are delusional, they'll never get political support, let alone from the public.
Mm. It just seems a really big waste of time, right? It's something that's being pushed forward constantly, and it's just
It's a
seems a
huge
waste of
it's a
time.
huge waste of time, because a lot of people in the farm community, they don't do this. They're not involved on a full-time basis with salaries. It's a passion project. They're passionate about it. They believe in it, and it's all volunteer work. They have full-time jobs that they have to take time off. I think of even myself. We would love for the FPC to become a full-time occupation in time, but we have to get there first, so that we can put 100% attention on these sorts of things all the time. But until that happens, we have to take time out of our own schedules, and that wastes our time. It wastes the public's time. It wastes everybody else's time. There's no sensitivity whatsoever about the amount of resources that are wasted, and which makes the whole process on its own unconstitutional. It's non-transparent. It wastes state resources on these hopeless, wishless thinking ideas, and yeah, the list goes on. We can go on that topic forever.
Going to be members of the audience that are going to be watching this saying, well, it's all part of the communist idea of disarming the public. It's also part of the ANC's idea of disarming the public so that they can expropriate their farms or their land. What's your views to that?
I don't think it's something that we should discount entirely when it comes to, like, never trust a politician. It's basically the old mantra. And back to when the Firearms Control Act's initial motivations, I believe that one of those motivations was that the ANC was distrustful of the citizenry and the possibility uh, of a violent uprising of some kind. I mean, the Avia Beer was still around then, even if they were never really a threat. But an armed citizenry tends to make politicians nervous, especially ones that have these grand ideas of social engineering, which the ANC does. The National Democratic Revolution is grand social engineering. Uh, the apartheid government was similar. It definitely didn't want black people to have firearms, and that was what the 1937 and 1969 acts were largely directed towards. Didn't really work, did it, considering how things went in the end? Because you can't control firearms. The entire rationale is just hubris. And yes, you can have a law that says nobody will have firearms, but I mean, you look in the UK, they're there. They have firearm offences, despite being an island nation, which gives them an advantage over nearly any other country that tries this sort of stuff. And now you want to apply that logic in Africa, South Africa, with its own past, and as Mackenzie said, there are probably more illegal firearms or unlawfully possessed firearms than there are lawful ones. And I would agree with him. I think you can't really know for sure, but the
I mean, we know we can almost guess it categorically, and if you actually look at the crimes that occur, a lot of them. I like to go on SAPS's website and they show you, well, we did a bust and we got this guy and we confiscated some. I love those pictures because they're always military grade weapons. They're not actually available to the
They're
private
not.
citizens to purchase.
But even going from the estimates of how many unlawful firearms there are in the country, I've got through a question and answer in Parliament. I asked someone to ask the Minister of Police back in 2017, how many previously unregistered firearms did you recover between 2007 and 2017, so 10 years, and then also how many registered ones, so stolen or lost, were recovered. Just going from the previously unregistered ones. So when they were found, there was no serial number on them, or if they did, there was no record of it. They were in the country unlawfully. They had somehow got in wherever they came from. That rate of recovery put up against how many the estimates there are of such firearms in the country, it would take over 300 years to recover them all at those rates of recovery, which immediately renders the entire project of getting control completely irrational, because this is assuming the numbers stay static and that there aren't more coming in every day, which, as we just saw, they're coming in from Namibia and everywhere. You can't, the genie is out of the bottle. It got out of the bottle as soon as the first firearms were invented. You can't put it away. If you want to get a handle on crime, violent crime specifically, which is why we have these laws, poorly motivated and irrational as they are, you need to fix the economy. You need to get people working. You need to fix the social values, and that that has been like social institutions in South Africa have been falling apart for ages. The apartheid state did a terrible job, or fantastic, depending how you look at it, at destroying social institutions, the family structures of, especially in the black community. And you don't fix that overnight.
Yeah, so if I look at the actual numbers, I think Razem Zanzi gave some examples, and there's been some other latest estimates, right? But as I'm sure you know, the actual last official estimate was from 2018. I mean, lots happened since 2018. But the latest suggestion is that there's around 4.3 million illegal firearms in South Africa. It's an estimate. You know, for all we know, the majority of them are sitting under Loot Freely House, because as we know, they've got an armed cache themselves. And the number of registered firearms in the country is like roughly around 3 million,
Three and a
with
half
a
to
further
four.
2 point, yeah, something like that. So we're seeing it just over 50% of firearms in South Africa are, well, illegal. Now, I think the rationality for this making firearms unlawful is a lot of them look to the Australian and the New Zealand model, where they did have ownership of firearms. They were made illegal, and supposedly those countries got safer, even though when you actually look at the data, that's not the case. And then they also used the 1970s laws, where obviously pistols were outlawed in the United Kingdom following the shooting that occurred there. And they say, well, supposedly that made the country safer. Although, again, when you actually drill into the data, it didn't really. So their idea appears to be it works in these overtly Western nations. You know, the Western nations that they hate? They say they don't want to be like because they're like colonizers. Well, anyway, it works in those nations. So why wouldn't it work in South Africa? Even though they don't want to be like a Western nation because they're white colonizers. But in this instance, they do. Make it make sense to me. I'm trying to understand this.
Well, for one, it doesn't make sense because, as you say, a lot of those statistics and arguments are manipulated, cherry-picked. I mean, in the case of Australia, a while back, I need to do more research into it, but on a cursory glance, there was a certain number of people that were killed in massacres of all types between 1973 and the Port Arthur massacre, including that massacre, which is what spurred on the changes in Australian law. And since those changes came in, there have been a certain number of people killed in massacres between that date and the present day, and the number is basically the same. Firearms are used less for the purpose of massacres. They are still used, but used less. But the death toll is the same, which suggests an underlying pathology phenomenon of massacres in the Australian context. And the United States, I guess it can be said to be similar, but people it's easy to get carried away with the US and think, oh, it's so bad there. It's like, well, the number of people killed with semi-automatic rifles of all types across the country in a given year is often 0.0 something percent. It's negligible.
It's less than ours.
Yeah,
It's less than
and
ours.
despite having more firearms than people in the country, and there are 350 million people in the United States, they have a national homicide rate of about 6, 7 per 100,000. And it varies dramatically between states. And there's no rhyme or rhythm whether the states have strict laws or lax laws. And in South Africa, we have like 1% of American firearms, if even that. And we have a population a fifth of the size. And we have a homicide rate of nearly 41, 42 per 100,000. There is no rhyme or rhythm here. And you mentioned Rise Mzansi and them, and I'm not surprised that they're on this bandwagon. They are of the more progressive type. Um, and
I think during their policy conference, they actually hosted Gun Free South Africa, didn't
yes, they did.
they? Mm.
Again, not super surprised considering the people that they are and their ideology. Um,
Mm.
but Gun Free South Africa's influence is also a fraction of what it used to be. And I've said before that I feel like a pendulum is beginning to swing in the opposite direction in the favor of farm owners. It's just a question of, okay, we just need to
But
hold the line, bat away these things like we are doing now and have done so far. And sanity, there might be an opportunity for sanity to prevail. But we need to be ready for it so that we can put something on the table and say, okay, cool, now we've got a chance to fix things. Let's completely reconceptualize what firearm regulation means in South Africa. That's a project all by its own. But it looks like the community is on its own is organically moving in that direction and starting to get more teeth and to get more interested. And I'm hoping that my doctorate, when it's complete, will really add impetus to that.
we are told that the more firearms there are in a country, the more dangerous that country is, right? We're told that civilian ownership of having firearms means that that's why we have a high crime rate. So let's actually assess this just as a final point and see whether or not the numbers actually stack up. So in the United States, there's 120.5 guns per 100 people.
At least
In
50%
South
of the
Africa,
population in the US probably has at least one firearm in the house.
well, per 100 people, that's
Yeah.
120
Yep.
firearms. So per 100
Yeah.
people, that's over one per household. But in South Africa, the rate is 9.7. So the US has 12 times more firearms per capita
Yeah.
than South Africa. The US homicide rate per 100,000 people is 5.4. In South Africa, it's 45. So in South Africa, there has 12 times less firearms than the US, has 8 times more homicides than the US.
Now, there's no rhyme or reason.
So correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. Sometimes it does. But what you could imply from the stats alone is that the US has a lower homicide rate because they've got more firearms per capita. And South Africa has a higher homicide rate because we have lower firearms per capita.
If you're going to apply the logic
So-
of people like Gun Free South Africa, that is what the logic gives you, which is absurd
100%.
because Gun Free South Africa will say, no, it doesn't mean that. It's like, but that's exactly what the implication is.
That's the stats say.
I live in Somerset West. I think Somerset West is probably one of the highest firearm owning towns in the country. It's pretty safe here.
Strange that. In any case, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for telling me what the latest is. So what the latest is that there are some ideologues in government, noticeably in the civilian secretariats of the police, and they may be drafting some legislation. And if they do, we all need to be prepared for it. That's basically the update, and we don't really know what that update will mean or what's actually in it. We can't say that it's being ideologically driven by any political party or any organization. It does just look like some nut jobs in the civilian secretariat just basically working on their own for Lord knows what reason. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. And the best thing that firearm owners and the general public can do in this is just, when it comes out, get angry. Send your comments in. Don't swear at them, obviously, but in the emails that you send. But oppose the legislation. Produce that 180,000 comment volume that tends to elicit some kind, that tends to scare them away until they come back again. And keep up to date with your organization of preference. Everybody's very much on top of this and keeping track of it. We just need to be ready for when it comes.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you,
Really
Byron.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Cheers. Right.